The first thing they teach you, when you take the job aboard a cyber prison, is to stop thinking of the bodies as people. They lie in rows in the cold deck, naked under thin foil sheets, tubes in their throats and their arms and their groins, eyelids taped shut so the muscles do not waste from twitching. The lights down there are blue because blue light hides the color of dying skin. I walked those aisles every shift for 3 years, and I never once managed to stop thinking of them as people. That is probably why I am still alive to tell this. It is certainly why everything that came after came after. My name is Will Singleton. I was 31 years old when I took the contract on the orbital block they called Cradle 9, hanging in a slow tumble out past the belt where Earth's law had stopped pretending to apply. I had a degree in human history from a school that no longer existed and a debt to a medical creditor that did. My mother had died of a fungal pneumonia that the patrons' new atmospheric scrubbers had introduced to the lower colonies, and the bill for her last 6 months had come to a number with too many zeros for me to read aloud. The Concord paid the debt in exchange for 5 years of my life. They told me I would be a guard. They did not tell me what I would be guarding or for whom. The recruiter who signed me was a woman in a gray suit who would not meet my eyes. She slid the contract across the desk with one finger and she said, "You will not enjoy this work, Mr. Singleton, but you will be very good at it because the work requires a man who reads." I asked her what that meant. She said, "You will find out." She did not lie to me. That was, in its way, the kindest thing anyone connected to the Concord ever did for me. I learned the for whom soon enough. The patrons came aboard in sealed envoy pods, never more than 2 at a time, always escorted by their own silicate handlers. I saw one up close on my 2nd week, when a sealed pod's gasket failed in the hangar and the maintenance crew had to crack it under emergency seal. The thing inside was the size of a man bent double, but it was no man. Its body was a fused lattice of dark crystal that moved by ringing, by sympathetic vibration through its own substance, the way a wineglass moves when you draw a wet finger around its rim. It had no eyes that I could find. It had a vent low on what I took for its face, and when it spoke through the translator collar bolted to the pod, its voice came out as a long, patient chord, like someone tuning an instrument in the next room. It said, "This delay is acceptable. We have purchased the afternoon." That was when I understood what we were. We were the afternoon. The patrons did not breathe our air. They did not eat our food. They could not, by their own admission, even perceive our colors in the way we did. Their cognition mapped the visible spectrum onto something that translated on the manifest reports as moral weight. Red was heavy. Blue was light. A sunset was a sentence. I think it is important when you are telling a story like this one to be honest about what the enemy was. The enemy was not a man with face paint. The enemy was a thinking mineral that had decided, somewhere in its history, that the suffering of soft creatures was a thing it could pay to watch. R.D. Crowley ran Cradle 9 for the Concord. He was human, or had been once. By the time I met him, he had taken so many cellular upgrades that his skin had the dry sheen of treated leather, and his eyes did not blink on a normal schedule. He had been a prison contractor on Earth before the privatization wars, and when the Concord arrived and asked which species had the most efficient mechanism for warehousing its own surplus, Crowley raised his hand. He liked to walk the cold deck with his hands behind his back, looking down at the sleepers the way a man might look at fish in a pond. He liked me, too, in his way, because I knew history and the patrons paid extra for accurate history. "You read the Civil War book," he said to me once, the 3rd month in. We were standing at the railing above Tank 6, 2,000 bodies under our feet, both volumes. "Yes, sir." "You marked passages." "Yes, sir." My patrons asked for an authentic Antietam last quarter. We delivered Antietam. The reviews were exceptional. Do you know what an exceptional review from the Concord is worth, Will? I did not. "A continent," he said, "per quarter." He smiled then, and I saw that 2 of his back teeth had been replaced with something that caught the blue light wrong. He gave me the operator's manual that week. He told me to study it. He told me that within a year, if I performed, I would be running my own modules. He told me that the patrons had specifically requested a man who could give them accurate Belgian trenches and accurate Tombstone afternoons and accurate Saigon alleys, and that the previous man who had done that work had been promoted off station, which I did not believe for a moment, because I had already seen the recycler logs. The way it worked was this. The condemned came up the gravity well in container ships, 600 at a time, sedated and stripped and tagged. We slid their bodies into the tanks, threaded the tubes, locked the helmets over their heads, and started the drip. Their minds went somewhere else. They woke up in a fabricated world, a Mississippi cotton port in 1850, a Belgian trench in 1916, a Tombstone street at noon with full sensory immersion and full historical accuracy and full pain response. They lived there. They thought there. They believed they had escaped or been released or been reborn. And then, eventually, the patrons logged in. The patrons did not wear human avatars. They could not. Their cognition did not map to bipedal motion in any clean way. Instead, the system rendered them as period-appropriate hunters, riverboat gamblers with derringers, Pinkerton men with Colts, Wehrmacht officers in long coats, and gave them perfect aim, perfect stamina, perfect knowledge of the terrain. The prisoners were given a knife, a name, and a head start. The hunt lasted as long as the patron had paid for. When the prisoner died inside the simulation, his body died on the slab. The cause of death on the manifest was always cardiac arrest. The manifests were never audited because the Concord had purchased the auditors. I logged the deaths. I tagged the bodies. I rolled the gurneys to the recycler. I did this for 3 years, and I told myself every night in my bunk that I had not chosen this and that I would walk away clean at the end of my 5. There was a moment, around the 18-month mark, when I almost believed I would. I had developed the skill the recruiter had promised. I could lay down a Belgian trench in 9 hours of build time and put rats in it, and put the right mud in it, and put the smell of phosgene in it, and the patrons paid bonuses for the smell of phosgene. I had been promoted to senior operator. I had a wall locker with my name on it, and 3 commendations from the Concord that I had never asked to receive. I had stopped in my own private accounting, counting the bodies in the recycler. I had begun, in the same accounting, counting the credits in my termination escrow. I had been very good at the work. The recruiter had not lied about that either. Then they came for a man named Lockwood, and I stopped being able to tell myself anything at all. Eli Lockwood had been an Army field surgeon during the Mars reclamation. He had been convicted of euthanizing 14 of his own wounded after the relief column failed to arrive. I had read his file. I had also read the eyewitness statements that the tribunal had buried, the ones that said the wounded had begged him, that the alternative was 3 more days of suffocation in a collapsed bunker, that he had cried while he did it and prayed afterward. The Concord did not care about context. The Concord had bought him for a Wild West module, and the patron who had bought the slot had requested a long hunt, 6 hours, a specialty package. Crowley walked me through the prep himself. "You'll run the booth on this one," he said. "Patron's a connoisseur, wants atmosphere, wants accuracy. You ride the booth, you keep the world honest, you log the kill, you go home." I had run booths before. I had never run one for a man whose file I had read twice. I stood in the operator's nook with my hand on the console, and I watched the world load around Eli Lockwood, a sun-baked street in a town that had never existed, a horse trough, a telegraph pole. The smell of horse dung and creosote piped in through the olfactory feeds. He woke up in front of a saloon with a revolver in his hand and no memory of who he had been before. The system had given him a new history, a drifter, a gun hand, a man with reasons to be running. They always gave them new histories. It made the hunt cleaner. They did not run as well when they remembered who they were. The patron logged in 3 minutes later. The system rendered him as a tall man in a black duster with a star on his chest, a marshal, a lawman come to collect. The patron's chord voice came through my monitor, patient and curious. It said, "This one is medical. Will he reason or will he flee?" I did not answer. I was not supposed to answer. The patrons spoke to themselves, mostly, through the booth, the way a man might mutter while choosing a horse at auction. Lockwood ran. They almost all ran at first. He ducked between buildings and the marshal followed at a walking pace in no hurry, because there was nowhere on the map for Lockwood to go. The map ended at the edge of town in every direction. Beyond the edge, the system rendered a desert that did not get any closer no matter how long you walked into it. The patrons liked the desert. They said it was a beautiful instance of human futility. I sat in the booth and I watched Lockwood run, and I watched the marshal walk after him, and I felt the thing I had been not feeling for 3 years start to come loose in my chest like a tooth working free of its socket. It took the patron 4 hours. He let Lockwood believe twice that he had escaped. He let him sleep in a hayloft. He let him drink water at a pump. Then he stepped out from behind a barn at sundown and shot Lockwood in the stomach and sat down on a fence rail to watch him die. The chord voice said, "The human face is most beautiful when it understands." I logged the kill. I shut down the world. I walked down to the tank deck and I unhelmed the body and I put my hand on Eli Lockwood's cold forehead and I stood there for a long time. There were no cameras in the tank rows. The Concord did not consider the bodies worth surveilling. I knew this because I had been the one who filed the deficiency report, and I had been the one who filed it away again unsigned. I went up to my bunk that night and I lay on my back and I stared at the ceiling and I said out loud, into the recycled air, "I am going to take this whole place apart." I did not know how. I had no weapon, no allies, no plan. What I had was a job that let me walk every aisle of the cold deck and a head full of the most violent history my species had ever produced. I had read the books. I had marked the passages. I knew what humans did to occupying powers, given time and motivation and the geography of their own homes. The aliens had built their hunting ground out of our wars. They had not stopped to ask why we kept fighting them. I started slowly. The first thing I did was learn the system from the inside. I had operator access, which got me the rendering engine and the historical libraries and the prisoner manifests. It did not get me the kill switch on the tanks, or the lock on the patron pods, or the docking codes for the supply runners. I needed all 3. I started by mapping who else aboard Cradle 9 had what I lacked. There was a woman named Marin Voss who ran the medical bay. She was 46, ex-fleet, and her file said she had transferred out for cause. The cause was that she had refused a euthanasia order on a wounded crewman during a boarding action and had gotten 3 of her own people killed disobeying it. The Concord had hired her anyway because they liked their staff to have things they could not afford to lose. She had a daughter back on Phobos. I did not know that yet. There was a tech named Sully Park who ran the rendering deck. He was 28. A former sim designer, brilliant, bitter, the only man on the station who could read the patron code and understand what was actually being rendered on their end versus ours. He had taken the contract for the money, and he had stayed for reasons he never said out loud. There was a chaplain. We had a chaplain, even on Cradle 9, because the Concord had read somewhere that human prisoners performed better in the simulations if they believed they had been given last rites. His name was Father Hennessy. He was 63 years old. He drank. He had been doing this for 9 years and he had not slept a full night in 6 of them. And there was a prisoner I had not killed yet. A woman named Iris Tanaka. She had been a cyber warfare specialist for the Pacific Coalition before the Concord arrived. She had been condemned for sabotaging the surrender transmissions, an act which had cost an estimated 40,000 lives in the immediate aftermath, and saved an estimated 400,000 in the years that followed. The math, when you ran it, was in her favor. The tribunal had not been interested in the math. Her body had been on Cradle 9 for 11 months, suspended at the bottom of Tank 3, waiting for a patron to buy her. Nobody had yet. She was being saved for a special module, a 21st century cyberpunk hunt, which the Concord was still calibrating. They wanted to do it right. I went to her tank first. I told myself it was reconnaissance. It was not reconnaissance. It was a man going to talk to the only person on the station who might be able to tell him how to bring down a wall he could not see. I jacked in on a private channel. I did not load the historical module. I loaded a blank space, a gray room with 2 chairs, and I rendered her avatar in it, and I rendered my own across from her, and I unlocked her cognition the way you unlock a man's voice to take a deposition. She blinked, she looked around, she looked at her hands, she looked at me. "You're not Concord," she said. "How can you tell? You blink twice in 3 seconds, they don't." I sat down. I told her where she was. I told her what was being done to the bodies in the tanks around hers. I told her what was being planned for her. She listened without interrupting, and her face did not change, and when I was finished she said, "How many of us are there in here?" "On this station, 6,400. Across the network?" "I don't know, tens of thousands. The Concord runs 11 cradles that I know of, probably more." She looked at her hands again. She flexed them. She said, "What do you need from me?" "I need to know if we can poison their world." She smiled then for the first time. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a person who has been waiting in a closed room for 11 months for someone to come and ask exactly the right question. "Yes," she said, "we can poison their world, but you'll have to bring the world to us." I went a Sully second. I picked him because I had watched him for a month, and I had seen the way his hands moved over the rendering console when he thought no one was watching, the small precise motions of a man fixing things that did not need fixing, the way a craftsman runs his thumb along a finished edge. I waited until we shared a late shift. I waited until the rendering deck was empty except for the 2 of us and the hum of the cooling stacks. Then I sat down on the stool next to his and I said, very quietly, "How long have you known?" He did not look at me. He kept typing. He said, "Known what?" "Whatever you have known, for however long you have known it." He stopped typing. He turned his chair toward me, and he looked at me for a long count of 3. He said, "Are you Concord internal?" "No." "If you are, I will kill myself in the next 10 seconds, and you will lose whatever you came to take." "I'm not Sully, I'm not. I ran Lockwood's hunt last week." He looked at me for another long count. He said, "The medical?" "Yes." He turned back to the console. He worked his jaw. He said, 4 years. I have known for 4 years. I have known since the second module I built, which was a Saigon alley, and I rendered the smell of jasmine in it because the patron asked for jasmine, and I watched a patron shoot a 16-year-old kid in the chest in front of a flower cart that I had put the jasmine on. I have known since then. I have stayed because I have a sister who needs the money. I have stayed because every time I tried to write a resignation, the words went out of my hands. I have stayed because I am a coward. Why are you asking me how long I have known? I told him. He listened the way Iris had listened, without interruption, and when I was finished he closed his eyes. He sat for a long time with his eyes closed and his hands flat on the console. Then he opened them. He said, "I have wanted to be asked this for 4 years. I have rehearsed answers to this question in the shower. Will, I am in. Tell me what to do." I told him. Marin took longer. I went to her 3 weeks later, after Sully and I had mapped the rendering deck and Iris had begun, inside the simulation, to make her first contacts. Marin was harder. Marin had a daughter and Marin knew it, and Marin had built her life on the careful management of what she could and could not afford to risk. I caught her in the medical bay on a slow night when she was inventorying sedatives, and I said, "Dr. Voss, I want to talk to you about something." She did not look up from the inventory. She said, "Whatever it is, the answer is no." "You don't know what it is." "I know what your face has looked like for the last 3 weeks. The answer is no." I sat down on the exam table. I waited. She kept counting. When she was finished with the sedative drawer, she closed it and she locked it and she turned to me and she said very precisely, "My daughter is 14. She lives with her grandmother on Phobos. The Concord pays her tuition. If I am terminated for cause, the tuition stops. If I am terminated by them in the way they terminate people, my daughter goes into the workhouse system, and you and I both know what the workhouse system is. So whatever you are about to ask me, please understand that the answer is no, and please understand that I have arrived at that answer in advance, with full knowledge of what is being done on this station and with full knowledge of my own complicity. I will not pretend with you, Mr. Singleton. I will not lie to you. The answer is no." I sat for a minute. I thought. I said, "What if I could get your daughter off Phobos?" She went very still. I said, "Sully has the docking codes for the supply runner network. We can move a person through that network, quietly, permanently, to a place where the Concord is not. I am not asking you to risk her. I am asking you to give me 3 weeks to get her safe, and then I am asking you for the keys to your medical bay." She looked at me for a long count. Her eyes were wet, but she did not let the tears go. She had not gotten 3 of her own people killed by being a woman who let tears go. She said, "If you fail to get her safe, I will report you myself." "I won't fail." "You don't know that." "No," I said, "I don't, but I am asking anyway." She nodded once. She turned back to the drawer. She unlocked it. She locked it again. She said 3 weeks. It took 5. But the girl was on a belt freighter bound for the outer hulks by the end of the 5th, and Marin got the encrypted ping in her bunk, and she came to find me in the corridor outside the rendering deck, and she said, very quietly, "The answer is yes." She walked past me without looking at me. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Father Hennessy came in last. I did not want him in. He was old and he drank, and he was the kind of man who would weep at the wrong moment. But he was the only one with unrestricted access to the recycler, because the Concord had decided, for accounting purposes, that the disposition of human remains was a religious matter. We needed the recycler, so we needed the priest. I made the pitch to him in his quarters with the door locked and the air vents stuffed with cloth, and I expected him to argue with me. He did not. He listened. He poured himself a drink. He listened more. When I was finished, he set the glass down without drinking from it, and he said, "Will, I have given last rites to 4,011 men and women in this place. I have known for 6 years that I was doing it under false pretenses. I have prayed for the courage to do something about it, and the courage has not come. If you are telling me that the courage has arrived now, by way of you, in this room, then I will not be the man who turns it away at the door." He drank the drink then. He drank another. Then he asked what he needed to do. I told him. He nodded. He poured a 3rd drink. He set it down, untouched, next to the 2nd. He said, "I have not eaten a meal in 9 years without thinking about what I am eating it on. I have not slept a night in 9 years without thinking about what I am sleeping above. I am 63 years old, and I have been on this station for 9 years, and I would like, before I die, to have done one thing here that does not require me to confess it. Tell me when to be ready." I told him. The plan, in the end, was Iris's. Sully and I made it work, but the architecture was hers. She built it from the inside of the simulation, because the simulation was the only place where the Concord did not watch her. They watched the bodies, not the minds, because they had not yet conceived that a mind in a tank could do anything to a body outside it. They were wrong. Iris was not the only cyber warfare specialist in the tanks. There were 43 of her, scattered across the population, and once I had built her a private channel, she found them one by one and woke them and put them to work. They worked in shifts, in a fabricated workshop she had rendered in unused memory, and they wrote code that the Concord could not see because the Concord had not thought to look in the place where they were writing it. What they wrote was a virus, but to call it that does it no service. It was a history. Here is what Iris understood that the Concord did not. The patrons had built their hunting modules on the back of our historical libraries. They had ingested everything, every war, every massacre, every uprising, every campaign of resistance fought by human beings against an occupying power. They had ingested it because they wanted to render it accurately. They wanted Antietam to smell right. They wanted Stalingrad to be cold enough. They wanted Saigon to feel like Saigon. So they had loaded, into the substrate of their own simulation, the complete tactical record of every successful guerrilla campaign in human history. They had built their hunting ground out of a manual for killing occupiers. All Iris had to do was teach the prisoners how to read it. We started small. We started with prisoners who were already strong, soldiers mostly, men and women whose minds had been broken by the simulation but not broken so badly that they could not be put back together. Iris woke them in her private workshop, restored their real memories, and walked them through what was being done to them. Then she gave them the manual. Then she sent them back into the modules. The first sign that the Concord noticed something was wrong came 9 months in. A patron logged a complaint. He had bought a Vietnam-era hunt, and the prisoner had not behaved correctly. The prisoner had gone into the bush and had not come out. The patron had walked the map for 6 hours and had found 17 booby traps, all rendered with period-accurate materials, and had eventually been killed by a pungy stake at the bottom of a tiger pit. The patron's chord voice on the complaint recording had been almost beautiful in its bewilderment. He said the human was supposed to be a clerk. The system said the human was a clerk. The clerk made the pit. Crowley pulled me into his office. "You wrote the module," he said. "Yes, sir." "Was the clerk a clerk?" "Yes, sir. Civil Affairs Officer, Saigon, 1968, convicted of war profiteering." "Then how?" I shrugged. I let my face do the thing my face had been doing for 3 years, the thing I had practiced in the mirror until it was reliable, the slack, slightly stupid attention of a man whose only ambition was to finish his shift. "Sir," the patron walked into the bush. The simulation rendered the bush. The bush had pungy stakes in 1968. Pungy stakes do not require a clerk to be a soldier. They require a clerk to be desperate. He looked at me a long time. He had eyes that had been replaced twice, and they did not track quite right, but they tracked well enough to make me sweat. "Refund the patron," he said. "Comp him a civil war." "Yes, sir." I walked out and I closed his door, and I leaned against the wall in the corridor for a full minute before my hands stopped shaking. After that, we moved faster. We had to. The Concord was beginning to notice that the hunts were getting harder, and the harder they got, the more the patrons paid, and the more the patrons paid, the more attention they gave us. We were running out of time, and we had not yet built the only thing that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the wake-up. A prisoner can fight inside the simulation. A prisoner can kill a patron's avatar inside the simulation. Even Iris had figured out how, by the 8th month, exploiting an authentication weakness in the patron handshake that allowed a sufficiently prepared human mind to seize the patron's connection and crash the chord-voices' cognition back through its own pod. We had killed 3 patrons that way already. The Concord had logged them as equipment failures. They had not yet noticed that the equipment was failing in the same way every time. But killing patrons inside the simulation did not free the prisoners. The bodies remained in the tanks. The drip continued. The hunts continued. Until we could wake the bodies, all we had was a slowly improving kill ratio inside a game we had not been invited to leave. The wake-up required physical access to the tank controls. Physical access to the tank controls required the master key. The master key was in Crowley's office, in a safe whose combination he had set to the birth date of a son who had died on Earth before the Concord arrived. I knew this because Father Hennessy had performed the funeral. Father Hennessy had been Crowley's priest, back when Crowley still pretended to be human in that particular way. In the weeks before we moved, Crowley began to suspect. He did not know what to suspect, and he did not know who, but he had been a prison contractor for 20 years, and he had the long animal instinct of a man who has learned to read a yard. He started taking the cold deck walks at odd hours. He started asking small, unnecessary questions about the rendering loads. He pulled Sully into his office twice in 1 week and asked him about render cycle variants. And Sully came out of those meetings the color of old paper and went into the bathroom for 15 minutes before he came back to his console. On a Thursday, 3 days before the move, Crowley invited me to dinner in his quarters. He did not call it dinner. He called it a debrief. He poured 2 glasses of something that was almost wine, and he sat across from me at his small table, and he watched me drink it before he drank his own. He said, "You have changed, Will." "Have I, sir?" "You used to flinch when I walked into the rendering deck. You don't flinch anymore." "I suppose I've gotten used to the work." "Have you?" "Yes, sir." He looked at me. He held the look. The patrons could not read human faces, but Crowley could, and he had spent his life learning to read the particular faces of men who had decided things they had not yet said. He said I had a son. "Sir?" "He died at 11 on Earth of a lung condition that I did not have the money to treat. That was before the Concord. That was when men like me had to decide what we would do for money and how much of ourselves we would spend doing it. I decided. I spent. I am not asking for your sympathy, Will. I am telling you that I know what a man looks like when he has decided to spend himself for something. I knew it in my own mirror. I know it now in yours." He set his glass down. He said, "Whatever you have decided, do not do it on my station." I looked at him. I made my face do nothing. I said, "Sir, I have not decided anything except to finish my contract." He nodded slowly. He did not believe me. He did not press it. He stood up and he walked to his door and he held it open for me, and as I passed him he said quietly, "I would have made the same decision, Will, in my younger years. I would like you to know that." I walked out. I closed his door behind me. I walked back to my bunk and I lay on it for an hour without moving. Then I got up and I went to find Iris in the workshop, and I told her we were going on Tuesday and not on Friday, and she said, "All right." We chose Tuesday. There was no reason for Tuesday other than that the supply runner was due on Wednesday, and we wanted 24 hours before any outside ship could dock. Sully spoofed the long-range comms. Marin prepped the medical bay for 6,000 emergency revivals, which she had been quietly stockpiling supplies for over the previous 4 months. Iris had her cyber warfare cell standing by in the simulation, ready to push the virus, the history, through every active patron connection at the moment the wake-up began. Father Hennessy unlocked the recycler bay, which had the only airlock on the station big enough to move bodies through in the numbers we were about to move them. I went to Crowley's office. He was at his desk. He looked up when I came in. He did not look surprised. I do not know if he had known and had been waiting or if his face had simply forgotten how to look surprised some years before. He said, "Will, what?" "I read the rest of the Civil War book," I said, "both volumes." He did not move. He said very slowly, "Did you?" "There's a section in Volume 2 about the prison camps, about what the guards became. And I think you'd like it." I shot him then with the maintenance pistol I had taken from the dock locker that morning. It was a low-velocity round designed for use in pressurized environments. It went in just under his collarbone and did not come out. He sat down slowly in his chair. He looked at the place where the round had gone in. He looked up at me. He said, "The Concord will burn this station from orbit." "I know. You will all die." "I know." "Why?" I thought about it. I owed him an answer. He had paid for it. "Because you forgot what we were," I said. "You read our books and you ran our wars through your engine, and you decided we were the meat. You never asked why we kept writing the books." He nodded once like a man acknowledging a fair point in a negotiation. Then he said, with what was almost a smile, "Tell my chaplain I am sorry about the son." Then he died. His eyes did the wrong thing on the way out. They did not close, they only stopped tracking, and I had to reach across the desk and shut them with my hand, because I did not want to take the master key out of the safe while he was watching me. I opened the safe, I took the key, I went down to the cold deck. Marin was already there, so were Sully and Father Hennessy. So were 11 of the off-shift guards, 6 of whom we had recruited in the final weeks and 5 of whom we had not. The 5 had been disabled, not killed. They lay on the deck plates with their wrists bound, and one of them, a kid named Ortiz who had never been anything but decent to me, was crying quietly with his face turned to the bulkhead. I am sorry for that. I am still sorry for that. I put the master key in the slot. I turned it. The lights in the tank rose went from blue to amber. The drip lines reversed. The helmets began their unlock sequence, slow, methodical, 6,400 at once. The whole cold deck filled with the long hiss of releasing seals. In the simulation, Iris pushed the virus. I will tell you what I know about what happened on the patron end, because Sully reconstructed it later from the chord-voice logs, and because some of it I saw with my own eyes through the booth feeds before the booths went down. The patrons were logged in across 41 active hunts at the moment of the wake-up. They were in trenches and saloons and alleys and cellars and the rest. They were doing what they did. The virus did not attack them directly. It did something worse. It restored the prisoners' real memories all at once, and it gave every prisoner inside an active hunt the complete tactical history of the period they were standing in. Every condemned man in every fabricated trench remembered, in one cold instant, who he was, what had been done to him, and how exactly the men who had stood in trenches before him had killed the people who put them there. The hunts ended in the next 4 minutes. I watched one of them on the booth I had run Lockwood from. It was a Belgian trench module, 1916, Ypres sector, mud and rats and the slow gray rain that never quite stopped. The prisoner was a man named Petrov who had been condemned for embezzlement. He had no military background. He had been in the trench for 90 minutes when the virus reached him, and I saw, through the booth, the moment it took. He stopped running. He stopped crying. He sat down in the mud and he closed his eyes and he opened them again, and he was a different man. He stood up. He picked up the rifle the patron had given him as a head start. The system always gave them a rifle in the trench modules, because the patrons liked it when the prey had a rifle and could not use it, and he walked along the duckboards toward the sap where the patron was waiting. He did not duck. He did not crawl. He walked. The patron stepped out to take the shot, and Petrov, who had never held a rifle in his life on the outside, put a round through the patron's avatar's eye at 20 meters, in the rain, on the first squeeze. Then he reached for the patron's collapsing avatar with his bare hand, and he reached through it, and he reached into the handshake, and he did what Iris had taught him to do. The chord voice on the booth feed made a sound I do not have a word for. It was not a scream. It was an instrument breaking. The recording cut out a quarter-second later. On the upper deck, a patron pod went dark. That was one of 41. The rest were variations. There was a Stalingrad in which the prisoner went into a basement and did not come out, and the patron followed her, and she had wired the door behind him with everything a person in Stalingrad in 1943 would have wired a door with, which was a great deal. There was a Tombstone in which the prisoner, a woman, a small woman, condemned for fraud, walked into the saloon where the patron was waiting and threw a kerosene lamp at the bar and walked out, and the building burned with the patron in it, because she remembered what she had read in the second volume about the fires at the prison camps, and she had decided, in the 4 minutes the virus gave her, that the patron would have his fire. There was a Saigon, and a Khartoum, and a Warsaw, and a Wounded Knee, and they were all different and they were all the same. The chord voices on the logs are something I do not like to think about. They had paid for an afternoon. They got an afternoon. They went into our wars looking for the human face most beautiful in the moment of understanding, and we showed them ours. The recordings cut off, one by one, in a rolling sequence, chord, chord, silence, chord, silence, silence. By the time it was finished, there were 41 dead patrons inside the pods on the upper deck, and 41 Concord syndicates back on whatever world they came from would be opening 41 death notices in whatever passed for their mail. In the tanks, the bodies began to wake. I will not pretend it was clean. Marin had stockpiled supplies for 6,000 emergency revivals, and she had been right to, because every single one of those revivals was a crisis. People came up out of suspension screaming, vomiting, seizing. The first wave hit the cold deck like a tide. Men whose throats had not made a sound in months came up making every sound they had ever held back, and the noise of it ran along the tank rows and bounced off the bulkheads and came back doubled. I had thought in the weeks of planning that the hardest part would be killing Crowley. I had been wrong. The hardest part was standing in the middle of the cold deck while 6,000 people remembered, simultaneously, what had been done to them, and trying to keep my hands from shaking long enough to lift the next man off the next slab. Marin went down the rows with the sedative gun. She had calibrated the doses for restoration, not suppression, just enough to break the seizure, just enough to bring the heart back to rhythm. She had practiced the dozing on Sully's rendering models for 3 weeks. She did not miss a single shot. I watched her work one row over from me, and her face had the closed, expressionless calm of a woman doing a thing she had not been allowed to do in 20 years. And I thought about the 3 of her own people she had refused to euthanize on that boarding action, and I thought she had been waiting for this row, exactly this row, since long before I had asked her. Some did not come up at all, 317 of them in the end, whose bodies had been too long in the tanks, or whose minds had been broken too deep in the hunts to come back. We laid them out in the recycler bay, and Father Hennessy gave them last rites for real, the ones he had been giving for false for 9 years, and his hands did not shake at all. He spoke their names. He spoke each name out loud, even the ones whose names he had to read off the wrist tag, even the ones whose mouths he had to close with his thumb. It took him 4 hours. He did not stop. He did not drink. When he was finished, he sat down on the deck plate next to the last body, and he put his hands on his knees, and he wept like a man who has not been allowed to weep in 9 years. The rest we got moving. We had 19 hours, give or take, before the supply runner arrived and noticed we were not who we were supposed to be. We had to be off the station and lost in the dark by then. Iris had spent the last month of her time in the workshop, alongside the cyber warfare cell, planning the breakout. She had bought us the docking codes for every shipping lane within 4 jumps of Cradle 9, and she had identified 17 abandoned mining hulks within reach that could shelter 6,000 people for the months it would take to figure out what came next. Sully had spoofed our station logs to show the entire population in good order. Marin had triaged the revivals into ambulatory, walking wounded, and stretcher. Father Hennessy had organized the deck-by-deck evacuation with the patience of a man who had been on a ship before. We loaded the supply runner first. We loaded the patrol boats. We loaded everything that floated. 6,047 living souls. By the count Marin ran at the airlock, into 11 vessels that had been built for crews of 40. We packed them 4 to a bunk and 6 to a corridor and 3 deep in the cargo holds, and Marin went down the line with a clipboard and a sedative kit, and she put down the ones who could not stop screaming gently, just enough to get them through the first jump. I was on the last boat. I stood at the airlock with my hand on the frame and I looked back into Cradle 9 one more time. The cold deck was empty. The blue lights were off. The tanks lay open like cracked clam shells, the foil sheets fluttering in the air circulation, the tubes coiled on the deck like dead worms. There was nothing left there worth burning. The Concord would burn it anyway. I thought about Eli Lockwood. I thought about the 4 hours the patron had taken with him. I thought about my hand on his cold forehead in the dark. I closed the airlock. We made the jump 20 minutes ahead of the Concord cruiser that came to investigate the comms blackout. We saw it on the long range before we cut the relays. A long pale shape sliding in from the cardinal axis, hull lit in moral colors I could not read on a human screen. The pilot of my boat was a former cargo runner named Esquivel who had been awake for 41 hours, and who was working the jump calc on a console he had never been trained on. And his hands moved across the keys, the way Marin's hands had moved across the sedative gun. And I understood, watching him, that everyone on the 11 boats was doing a thing they had not been allowed to do until that morning, and that none of them were going to do it badly. They burned Cradle 9 from orbit as Crowley had promised. We watched it go on the long-range feed, a brief bright thing against the black, and nobody on my boat said anything. Father Hennessy crossed himself. Marin did not. Sully closed the feed. A boy of about 9, who I later learned was the son of a woman from Tank 11, asked his mother what the bright thing had been, and his mother told him it was a star going out. He accepted that. He went back to sleep against her shoulder. I have thought about that exchange more than I have thought about most things in my life. We scattered into the hulks. We have been scattering ever since. The Concord did not burn the other cradles. They could not. By the time the news of what had happened at Cradle 9 reached the syndicates, Iris's virus had reached the other 10 cradles too. She had been writing it for them as well, the whole time, and Sully had pushed it through the same comms relays that the Concord used to bill the patrons. Every active hunt across every cradle ended the same way ours did, in the same 4 minutes, in the same rolling silence on the chord-voice logs. 63,000 people came up out of suspension across 11 stations. 41,000 of them survived the wake-up. Most of those are still alive. Some of them are with me. Some of them are out there somewhere, doing whatever a person does after they have lived in a hunting ground and walked out of it. The Concord did not know what to do with us. They had built an economy on the assumption that human beings, properly sedated, properly motivated, properly framed, would die quietly inside the worlds they bought for them. They had not budgeted for the possibility that we would notice we were in a world. They had not budgeted for the possibility that we would notice it together. They have in the years since stopped offering historical hunt packages. The patrons who survived have, I am told, lost interest. The chord-voices, when they speak of us now, do not call us the afternoon. I do not know what they call us. I doubt it is flattering. We are still out here. The hulks are cold and they are cramped and the food is bad and the air smells like other people's sweat and other people's grief. Iris runs a school in one of the bigger hulks, teaching code to the kids who were born after the wake-up. She lost 2 fingers on her left hand to frostbite in our second winter, and she types now with 8 fingers and a stylus held in her teeth, and she is faster than any of her students. Marin runs a clinic. Her daughter is 23 now and she is a surgeon, and she works alongside her mother 3 days a week. Marin cried when she met her at the airlock at the end of that first long year, and she has not, to my knowledge, cried since. Sully runs a relay station that we are not supposed to know about, somewhere in the deep dark on the far side of the belt, and he sends out, on a schedule of his own making, the recordings of what was done to us at Cradle 9. He sends them to every Concord syndicate he can find an address for. He says he wants the chord-voices to have to keep hearing it. He says he wants them to know that we wrote it down. Father Hennessy died last spring of nothing in particular in his sleep with his hand on a book. I dug his grave myself. He had asked me to. He had asked in the months before for one last thing, that the marker over him not have his name on it, only the names of the 317 he had given last rites to in the recycler bay, in the order he had spoken them. I had the marker cut. It took 11 hours to read. He would have liked that. I am 61 years old now. I am the last of the original 5 who made the plan, and I will not be around much longer because my heart is bad and the medicine that would fix it is on a world I cannot go to. That is all right. I have outlived the parts of this story that needed outliving. The Concord is still out there. The patrons are still out there. The chord-voices still ring through the dark somewhere in the wars they pay for and the wars they cannot bear to pay for anymore. We did not end them. We only ended a particular thing they were doing to us. But I will tell you what I think about at the end of the long shifts, when the hulk is quiet and the kids are asleep and the recycled air smells the way recycled air always smells. I think about the patron in the black duster. I think about him sitting on the fence rail at sundown, watching Eli Lockwood die. I think about his chord voice saying that the human face is most beautiful when it understands. I think he was right. He was right about the wrong face. He should have looked at his own. That is the part of the story I want the old men to hear, the ones who have sat in their kitchens and read their books and wondered in the long evenings whether anything they ever learned amounted to anything at all. It does. The aliens came down out of the dark with their crystal bodies and their patient voices and their bottomless money, and they bought our wars, and they bought our prisoners, and they bought our history. They thought they had bought us. They did not understand that we wrote the history down on purpose. They did not understand that we write everything down on purpose. They did not understand that a species that remembers what was done to it, every time, in detail, in 2 volumes, is not a species you put in a cage and bill by the hour. They learned. We taught them. The teaching cost us 630-some lives in the wake-up and 9 years of Father Hennessy's sleep and Eli Lockwood and 4,010 others before him. And it cost me a job I should never have taken and a debt I should never have owed and a hand that I will not get back the feeling in, because the cold of that last shift went into the bones and stayed. The cost was the cost. We paid it. We are still paying it. The accounting on our end is not finished and may never be. But the chord voices do not buy our afternoons anymore. That is something. On the bad nights when the air is thin and the medicine has not come, and the dark outside the porthole is the same dark it has always been, I tell myself that. I say it out loud to the bulkhead, the way I used to say things out loud to the ceiling of my bunk on Cradle 9. The chord voices do not buy our afternoons anymore. Then I close my eyes and I sleep, and the blue lights of the cold deck wait for me on the other side of sleep the way they always wait, and I walk those aisles in my dreams the way I walk them awake. I do not stop thinking of the bodies as people. I never have. I never will. It is probably why I am still alive to tell this. It is certainly why everything that came after came after.